together. Let me bring on stage Hollis, Liverpool, Chokers. Alive. Chokers. Especially for the mothers, all present. Oh. I see black women running from their race. They own black children they can't face. They don't know their roots as a glorious bloom. Blessed be the fruit of their womb. They just be acting as though they're ashamed of their history. They just be proud of other people's own. They just be glad to disclose their baby's ancestry, putting their child upon a false throne, not their own. For hear them boast to their friends and their neighbor, my baby's nose from his Spanish grandfather. My grandmother married a Chinese named Lau. That is why the eye's so pretty and he has such thick eyebrows. The dimple come from my husband's side, whose great-grandfather was Irish. And watch how the eyes pretty and wide, cause my mother mixed with British. And watch at me, I'm Caribbean Portuguese, so the shiny and curly. But the baby black down to the eyeball, they see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. I said the baby black like a voodoo doll, they see Africa at all. I see black women running from their race. Foods from our table they can't face. If you hear them boast about how they just make French fry and French toast with gut steak, they have a name for all them foreign foods they using. Italian pizza, they murdering. Big African wedding, they serving Spanish rice with Scotch whiskey and French wine on ice to feel nice. Chinese chowing, serving in black christening. English muffin when the sun graduating. They just fry egg and call that Spanish omelette. And frying Irish potato with New Zealand butter in bed. Hungarian goulash and Irish stew is what they're preparing for lunch. They even going Honolulu to drink up the Hawaiian punch. Yet when they brew, they're Bobby and turn cuckoo and swizzle callaloo. Or beg your bone and champion ball, they don't see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. They're making yam and dashi look small.
They don't see Africa at all.
Black people must stop running from their race and search this their place for their trades. You don't have to go by plane to Ghana in order to see Africa. Every time you come planting with water and vessel, or on your hand you wear your slave band. Or when the Boko Jumbi walk tall amidst the people, then you rubbing shoulders with Africans. Understand what the neighbors say, how she neighbors string berry in New York City, so that makes her a Yankee. Oh, how she love stories of Arabian Nights and boasting about her French perfume and her Turkish delights. African dashiki she would wear, she would not even let her hair. Stories of the Lagahoo, her children them never hear. That when she husband, Mr. Paul left her last year, she run quickly for Obia. She burning light to put blight on Paul. She ain't see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. The Obia man gives she push back to bring back Paul.
She ain't see Africa at all.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. There will be a man gishi the bush battle bring back Pashi and see Africa at all. Some self-criticism there from Chalk Dust, Dr. Hollis, Liverpool. They ain't see Africa at all. They ain't see Africa at all. I know we've been seeing Africa a lot recently in Guyana, because every time they withdraw that money from it part of G, is Africa they're touching. Every time they bulldoze the homes in Mocha or Linden, is Africa they're bulldozing. Every time they spit in a police face, is Africa they're touching. Every time they give public servants a pittance, 6.5%, is Africa they're touching. We've been seeing Africa a lot in Guyana. In Guyana. They ain't see Africa at all. Good evening to all of you and welcome to Politics 101 on a Thursday evening. We're going to be doing it here tonight. We're going to be doing it here tonight. The baby black like a voodoo doll. They ain't see Africa. You know, we black people, my mother mix up with Spanish and my grandfather, they half Chinese and so on. You're African. You're African. You're African. And we got that fight that we have to fight in Guyana. And of course, in any part of the diaspora, always rediscovering Africa. And there are forces that would not like us to talk about Africa. If you talk about Africa, you're racist. You know, they want us to be without identity. Identity is perhaps the most important thing about human beings. Identity comes from identify who you identify with. when Usain Bolt go down and that gun goes off and he sprints down the field and left everybody else behind. We are identifying with him. He's a black man. I always hear we talk about the human race. Well, they don't know human race. Race starts with the color code, black and white. And then you have the different colors in between, the brown people and the yellow people and the red people. There's no human race. There's a human family. There's a human species. A human race. What human race are you talking about? We black people could talk some nonsense sometime, you know. I mean, but it's good that the Calypsonian can make us look at ourselves and help us to make sense of us. That is why, for me, it is the greatest music in the world. In the world. Not because we African are the greatest people in the world. That's not what I'm saying. What makes Africans unique is that unique experience of enslavement. We have a lot in common with others in the world. After all, everybody else came from Africa. But it's that experience of plantation slavery that gives us a unique perspective on the world. You all have been hearing me talking about worldview on this program. That is why there are things that we will see that others may not necessarily see, comes out of our experience. Tonight we're going to be talking about that because it's budget time. It's budget time and we're talking a lot about money. And you read some commentaries about how the budget is developmental and how the budget is this and the budget is that and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, budget, like any other law, any other policy, it has to do with people. And they're real people in Guyana. And we are a diverse people. And so one set of people will look at the budgets and see something, and another set of people look at it and see something else. For example, when we Africans look at $230-something billion dollars, for infrastructure. If you're Indian Guyanese and Portuguese Guyanese, oh God, you see money. If you're African Guyanese, you ought not to see money there. You ought not to see money there because they ain't got no money in there for you. Not because you lack entrepreneurial capacity. After all, some of the big entrepreneurial initiatives have been taken by Africans. I mean, the village movement doesn't have as much. You're not getting mati. Not in Guyana, not in the diaspora. Going into the gold field and exploring there is African star that. You come down to the 1980s and 1990s with the IMF and structural adjustment intervention and the introduction of trading is black women. Save the economy, save Guyana. And yet sometimes we buy into the old notion that black people can't do business, you know, and all that thing. And when we say that, we write ourselves out. $1.14 trillion. The question is, are black people at the table to decide how that money is spent? How much of that money is coming to us? These are questions we're going to be exploring. Not because we are malicious, it's because United Nations says that despite all the laws that are passed and all the things that governments have done, the question of anti-black racism is real, and they dedicate a decade to it. And Guyana signed on to it. And a miserly 100 million, God bless David Granger. At a time without oil, he said, I'm giving you all 100 million. And this government, despite the growth in the economy, exponential growth, one of the highest growth in the world, then increased the 100 million. But here's the story. They're not giving the 100 million to black people with Prodigy. They're taking the 100 million, turn it into campaign because they're going to black people and say, look, black organization, look, a small piece. Welcome to Politics 101. If you're joining us from Guyana, good evening. Good evening to all of you wonderful people. Notice some people are joining us from Chicago, the windy city. I think it must be cold there like hell. Those of you who join us from the United States, Canada, England, France, welcome to Politics 101, our Caribbean, the wider Caribbean, welcome to Politics 101. If you're joining us from my home village, and I don't want to get in trouble with you all because you all say, I don't have a Buxton enough. Well, you all want to kill me. You all want to kill me. We have to be national. And you all Buxtonians too. You all too much in you all self. Welcome to Politics 101. The good people of West Bobis. West Bobis, good evening. Good evening. We're going to have Vincent Alexander tonight and Eric Phillips. And we're going to be talking about race, ethnicity, and the economy. Is there such a thing as a colorblind economy in a place like Guyana? Is there such a thing as a colorblind budget in a place like Guyana? Because that is what they will have us believe, discussing the numbers. So much for agriculture, 97 billion. There's something colorblind about that? I don't think so. I don't think so. Welcome to Politics 101, the place to be at 7 p.m. every day. Every day. Let's bring in our guests. Brother Eric Phillips, good evening, my brother.
Good evening, David. How are you?
I am surviving. I'm surviving, as they say. Vincent, good evening.
Good evening, good evening.
I haven't had you guys in for a long time. Happy New Year. And we are ready to roll. The NC Africa at all. Eric and Vincent, I hope you are not in that category of not seeing Africa at all. I know you are not in that category. Do we still have that problem of our people sometimes not embracing Africa as we should? Have we come a long way? Are we, what are your thoughts on? Because it seems to be an ongoing issue. It seems to be generational. I suspect both of you, we all, in a sense, are products of the 60s and 70s, and we were lucky, I would think, because we came of age in the period of Black power. And so we had no choice than to be Black, and we had to see Africa whether we like it or not. But as the Black power movement waned, have we seen a kind of decline in African consciousness? I'll start with you, Eric, and then I'll come to Vincent.
Yes, David. There is a decline. A few years ago, we saw the Black Lives Matter movement that reinvigorated people's thoughts about being Black and about being African. But the world is changing so dramatically, and in particular in Guyana, the new generation is not interested because the school system doesn't teach them anything about being Black or being African. It's about one Guyana. It's about having no identity. And of course, because there is this sense of fear, people are afraid to do certain things to show their Blackness. At another level, though, you're seeing it in hairstyles and how people dress. But the consciousness isn't there. It's just more a style that I'm African, I can wear dreadlocks, I can do this, I can do that. The sense of what Africa is not known to them, and the sense of who they are is being lost because we're not transmitting that to the school system.
Vincent, Eric makes a very good point there that this thing is systemic, because the system, the educational system, does not promote the whole notion of African consciousness. What do you think?
Indeed, there's a deficiency in our education system in promoting African consciousness. I would even go further to say promoting Guyanese consciousness. There's a deficiency in the education system. And so, through exposure to the education system, one is not exposed to an understanding of one's own history and one's self. But having said that, I think we are in a very paradoxical situation. Paradoxical because whilst on one hand, the neoliberal ideology seems to have taken over the world, and we see ourselves from that perspective, and therefore individualism is now trumping the collective, and therefore the individual is not seeing himself in the context of the community. And in this instance, we're talking about the African community. Individualism has trumpeted all of that within the context of the neoliberal ideology. But having said that, I wish to make the observation that because of the development of new technologies, we are exposed to much more knowledge than we were in the past. So although you may not see a growth in the number of people and consequentially the number of communities who see themselves as African, there is much more out there today than there ever was about the reality of Africa. And therefore, the basis for us to see ourselves proudly as Africans. In the past, in the absence of the virtual world, not much information was shared, and now so much more is being shared that we have a greater potential now, even greater than the era of Black Power and the Liberation Movement, to know about ourselves and therefore to identify ourselves as Africans of whichever sort.
Vincent, while I have you on the floor, and then Eric will come in, one of the headlines in today's newspapers, the independent newspapers in Starbrick News, it says, withdraw African Global Leadership Award to President Ali. And Kaito News said Itpadaji objects to leadership award to Ali. It seems as though President Ali, well, not it seems, President Ali has gone to Ghana to receive a Global African Award. And Itpadaji and other Black organizations are objecting to him receiving that award. I want to preface my question to you by reminding that some years ago, the South Africans had given an award to Fox Burnham, and some organizations and individuals, many of them close to the party that I belong to, objected to Burnham getting that award because of the assassination of Walter Rodney and the PNC government involvement in it, allegedly, and so forth. And I think that award was withdrawn. Eventually, I think it was given to Burnham later on. So this is not this issue of receiving awards by heads of government and heads of state is not new. So I just wanted to throw that in. But Vincent and Eric, why are you all objecting? Well, let me just, because I haven't seen Eric comment on it, so I should withdraw you all. But Vincent, why is Itpadaji objecting to this award being given to President Ali?
David, I think what you have said as the preface is important. Awards are not vacuous. Awards are given for a reason and a purpose. And when the South Africans initially decided to give Burnham the Tamba Award, it had to do with his contribution and Guyana's contribution to African liberation. So very, very clear the basis on which that award is given. And nobody could question the contribution of Guyana and Burnham to African liberation. And therefore, basically, he was entitled by virtue of the criteria that they established to that award. And so that brings us to what is the purpose of the award, which is now at the center of controversy. In granting that award, the African Prosperity Network has articulated that Ali is the leader, the president of the fastest growing economy, and that in this fastest growing economy, Ali has to be uplifted for the equity and probity with which he has handled our wealth, our prosperity. And so one can objectively ask the question, like we asked about Burnham, what has Ali done in the first instance to make Guyana the fastest growing economy? And I would contend that no politician, none of us, can attribute the fastness of the growing of the economy to our own doing. It has to do with what nature has gifted us. And the fact that Exxon and others have been able to explore, discover, produce, and sell our oil. And so it's not something that one could say, well, award Ali because he's made it possible for us to have the fastest growing economy. He's not. So on that score, he doesn't qualify. Secondly, what about equity and poverty in relation to the wealth that we have uncovered? Well, Ali has made it clear, I don't think people seem to understand, that in dealing with the people of African descent, there's no need for equity. If you listen to everything that he says, and even in defending himself in response to the petition which has been submitted, he's made it clear that we are doing things for everybody, and he is not at any point in time, now or before, specified what the United Nations specified. And that is the continuing dilemma of the people of African descent and the need for equitable treatment. His position is that we're equal, and therefore, if his government declares a policy, we all benefit, and there's no detriment, there's no being left behind by the Africans, and therefore, what's their problem about equity? So it is ridiculous and ludicrous for anybody to associate Ali with equity in relation to the people of African descent, because his own pronouncements are quite the opposite. He argues that there is no need for equity because of the equalness that exists in this society. And we know that equity is about redressing unequalness. And we know there is unequalness, but he contends no need for equity because there's equalness. And then we come to the questions of poverty, which has to do with a leader being honest and fair and just in what he does. Ali can hardly claim that level of honesty. Can hardly claim it. Again, because of his own actions. Ali is the person who has interacted with officials of IPADA-G and said to them that he will meet with them as a representative of the people of African descent. He said that to us in person at least on 3 occasions. As a consequence, he's been written to for us to realize what he promised. And he's never, ever responded. Where is the honesty in a leader who looks you in your face, shakes your hand, takes a pic, publishes the pic, and then stabs you in the back by not honoring his own word? Where's the honesty in that? Where's the honesty in Ali going to Mocha Arcadia and telling the people, and this is public knowledge of Mocha Arcadia, as he told me as well, that with the construction of what is now called Heroes Highway, that the property adjacent to that highway will be, the value will go up, the value will appreciate. He told the people that. Having previously, when he was Minister of Housing, encouraged them to build their buildings and to regularize those buildings and things like that, and actually started the process. Having done those two things, having raised people's expectations about their property, he then bulldozes the property. Where's the property in that? And so one does not have to look far to determine that if the criteria they're using is the fastness of the growth of our economy, equity, and poverty, then Ali does not qualify by any stretch of the imagination. It has nothing to do with what Ali has done, critiquing what he has done. It has simply to do with critiquing what he has not done in relation to the people of African descent, which clearly identifies him as someone who has not embraced equity and someone who has not conducted himself with the probity, two things which they said are the basis for that award.
Vincent Alexander, chairman of ITPADG, among other portfolios that he holds, but I suspect tonight, in his capacity here, he is closer to the chairmanship of ITPADG than the other organization. Chief Eric Phillips, and I always forget to to address you correctly because, of course, a year and a half ago, some royalty came from Africa, and they spent some time in Guyana, and you and yours truly also were became chiefs, and so forth. Chief Eric, where do you stand on Ali getting this award?
David, we are analyzing this incorrectly. This is geopolitics. Guyana is the fastest growing economy in the world. Ghana is struggling. Ghana last year paid 43% of their revenues in interest debt. They have oil, they're broke. Mia Mottley wants to be Secretary General of the United Nations. If you look at what Mia has been doing in Ghana, she's visited Ghana 3 times, opened up an embassy. If you look at what happened in Argyle, where you had Motley, you had Gonzalez, you had folks from Trinidad, all hovering around Guyana, because if anything happened between Guyana and Venezuela, the whole Caribbean tourism economy is dead, and Barbados and all those islands are dead. So they're interested in their own self-interest, not Guyana's interest. But the bottom line is Guyana is the fastest growing economy in the world. A certain group of people are promoting President Ali. You saw what happened when he was in Rwanda at the Commonwealth Games, Commonwealth leaders meeting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You saw what happened when he was invited to the Harvard Club. You saw what happened when Mia, even though she is head of the Prime Minister's Subcommittee on Reparations, doesn't speak on reparations, but ask him to speak and to go on TV. So he's being positioned as a global leader because Guyana is the fastest growing economy in the world. Guyana has oil, and it's a counteraction to all the congressional interventions, the Rickford Burke, the Apology things. So this is geopolitics. It's not about the award. It's about perception. Who's giving this award? Is it the government of Ghana? No. By the way, the current government of Ghana is the political party that got rid of Kwame Nkrumah. I don't know if you know that.
No,
So when you look at all the geopolitics, I assess this differently. It's about buying influence. It's about creating this aura that this country is fair to Africans, in spite of all the evidence contrary to it. So, I mean, I was in the same building, the Kempinski Hotel, in November with the president dealing with Africa Union and Caribbean reparations coming together. So I look at it in a broader context. It's not about the award. It's about how Guyana is being positioned and how the leader of Guyana is being positioned and what people want to get from Guyana.
Vincent, you've heard Eric, and I suppose one can conclude that Eric does not necessarily share with Padaji's view that he shouldn't get the award.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you have to understand why he was given the award, not if he deserves the award.
Right. Vincent, any response to that?
People see things from different perspectives, and they aren't necessarily at odds, though they see things from different perspectives. I represent the African Guyanese community which has been reaching out to the president as president and has been snubbed. And therefore, we come to the table from that perspective. Even as Eric comes from a different perspective, which we understand. We see it from the perspective of Ali wanting to get the award.
Of course.
And the chances are that he lobbied for this.
Of
Eric
course.
sees it from the perspective.
All of that is true.
Of people wanting to give Ali the award. Because, one of the contentions is that one of the front runners in giving this award is someone who's been knocking on the door here for business.
Yep.
And has not been very successful.
Has been snubbed.
And we know in Guyana, if you want to be able to get involved in business and have opportunities, that you have to kowtow to the government. We have a system now which is called Call BJ. If you want something in Guyana, they tell you on the ground, they say call BJ. If you call BJ, you'll probably get it. So this is like call Ali. So I have no problem with Eric's perspective, and I think it is useful that you have both myself and Eric so that all of the perspectives are laid bare.
Yeah. And it points to our diversity even within the ethnic communities, because sometimes people think that we are monolithic in
But
our
David,
thought.
we need to understand the full holistic view.
Yeah.
Locally, we know the issues.
Yeah.
But if you were to ask anybody outside of Guyana about Guyana, they have this view that everything is rosy and everybody's being treated equally. And this award keeps promoting that. And the question then becomes, who is promoting this and why? What is the geopolitical reason why this is happening? And so we have to put the two together to fully understand. It's the same thing with the budget.
And
because the budget is being promoted as one of the largest budgets ever. It's a 4 to 6% increase. In 2020, this budget was $329 billion. 3 years later is $1,147 billion. I'm not talking trillion, let's talk billion so you can understand it. From $329 billion to $1,147 billion. That is incredible. And when you look at the composition of the budget, if you were to do what Ravi Dev was asked, let's do an ethnic audit.
Yes.
You will see where this budget is. And
Yes,
And
Eric, and I'm glad you are going there because that's where I intended to go. And since you have the floor, talk us through what is behind those numbers. If you were to do an ethnic audit of the budget, what do you see there, especially as it relates to African Guyanese? Talk to
you
me.
see very little, because we're not in the private sector, because we're not in the areas where all the money is. We're not in oil and gas. We're not even in the area where we're creating human resources to fill the future needs of Guyana. We're short of 100,000 people. Everything there is massive, but it doesn't include us. We don't appear. And the question then becomes, what is the purpose of the budget? If the purpose of the budget is to have a fair, inclusive, sustainable, innovative, and future looking budget where all benefit, then this budget doesn't do that. And so, I've listened to Raman McRae, I've listened to PwC, Price Waterhouse, I've listened to the politicians debate this budget. And to me, it's irrelevant because what is the government doing? The government is seeking to be reelected. The government is seeking to have its constituencies well fed. And the government has the ability to draw down on the sovereign wealth fund to do that. And what I said to you the last time we met is that the opposition should never debate the government's budget. What the opposition should do is create their own budget and present it. And that's what I did the last couple of days. I took this budget and used the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is people focused, which is inclusive. And if I go through each and every element of the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's 17 of them with 169 targets, you will see where this budget is. SDG 1, no poverty. Where does this budget address the issue of no poverty? And I would do the SDGs against an ethnic matrix. Africans, Indians, Amerindians, Chinese, and I would tick all the 17 SDGs. Zero hunger. Where does the African community fit into this budget? Quality education. As you go through each of the 17 SDGs and you do an ethnic audit, we're missing. So I would have done that first if I were the opposition. And then I would have created my own priorities. What are my priorities? Inclusiveness. My priorities are economic diversification, agriculture. My priorities are village diversification. My priorities are making sure some key sectors become prominent. My priorities would be to enlarge the revenue base from Exxon. Look, 75% cost recovery. Why can't we convert some of that into equity, especially with the gas to shore? There's so many things we can do. Why do we enlarge the local content architecture? Because right now we're getting dribs as Guyanese, so that we could include more Guyanese. If we want to be inclusive, why not build 100 African businesses? Why not build 100 Amerindian businesses? Why not partner some businesses with the Portuguese and the Chinese and with foreign companies? Why not give a flat tax? Because the private sector is eating away, is not paying taxes. So as I look at this budget, I see very little strategic thinking in terms of making the society inclusive. I see a larger generational and intergenerational gap of wealth. And I see a debt to equity ratio that is troubling, that's not sustainable. And then if you look at another framework, ESG, environmental social governance, and you use that framework, you see all the issues there showing that we're very unstable. And this budget does not promote us into the future in an inclusive, sustainable manner. If you look at Exxon, why are we paying for Exxon's taxes? Why are we putting ourselves at risk? If we look at the African community, we know that in 2030, according to the IPCC, Georgetown is underwater, which means the whole coast is underwater, which means the budget should reflect some strategy to make sure that all those villages that are going to be destroyed, there's something done for them. So what is our land policy? If you look at Amerindians, they have a lot in here. They have carbon credits, 30% to 750 million. They have an Amerindian Development Fund. They have an Amerindian ministry. They have their own budget in terms of entrepreneurship. Where is that for us? So when I look at this budget and analyze it from a SDG perspective, from an ESG perspective, and from a revenue perspective, this budget scares me. What are we doing with climate change? Do we need a new city? What are we doing in terms of inflation? If you want to make it inclusive, then increase the public sector salary, because a lot of money is hidden in infrastructure and agriculture that could simply be pulled out to increase salaries so that there's a living wage. So there are many things in this budget that are there for a particular reason. It's an election year. You can draw them from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. The private sector is happy. The constituency that votes for the government is happy. They're buying the Amerindian community through lots of other things. And that's what it is. We are not in this budget. Even when you come to land, yes, 10,000 house lots. That's not where generational wealth is. Generational wealth is in the 20 to 30,000 acres of land that's being given to the Portuguese to do soya farming and the private sector to do other things. When you look at what's going on with milk and what the incentives are and what the tax structures are, you see what's going on. So I would have used the SDGs and the ESG model and create a very different budget. One that is inclusive, fair, sustainable, and deals with the risks, climate change, that deals with our people being poor. And that's not been done. And it's easy to do. So after you do that, and you look at how you enhance revenues, as I said, we should be converting some of that cost recovery into equity. We should make the gas assure such that 20% is put aside for Guyanese of all races. We should be creating 1,000 engineers, 1,000 scientists, 2,000 managers, 100 lawyers. Where is it in the budget? Gold doesn't do this. Gold is 20,000 scholarships. We need mission-directed scholarships. We need to say that this economy is going here in the next 20 years. What do we need? There are 160,000 jobs short. There are 102,000 Venezuelans in this country. Where do you think those jobs will go? So that's my point, in that we need to look at the budget, not from the point of view the budget is there, because the opposition can't change anything. What they should have done was create their own budget using the framework I suggested and said, for the African community, for the Amerindian community, for the Indian community, here are the priorities, because we are unequal and we need to get equity. And that has not been done. So our villages are totally at risk. Our public servants are going to get into poverty and can't buy homes because of the salary structure.
Brother Eric Phillips, Chief Eric Phillips, as usual, quite incisive when it comes to these matters. Good evening to all of you. Sister Nicole Cole, good evening to you. Good evening to Brother Hector. Welcome to Politics 101. As you all can appreciate, tonight is serious business. Taking that budget and taking off the mask of colorblindness from it and laying it out. Vincent, you've heard Eric. There are all kinds of issues and concepts involved there. I have introduced the concept of a non-colorblind budget. Eric has talked about an ethnic audit, taking all of that into consideration and whatever other construct you have in mind. Talk about this budget from the standpoint of race, ethnicity, and particularly from the standpoint of African Guyanese.
David, you should know that in strategy, locally and internationally, has advocated for statistics based on ethnicity, the data based on ethnicity.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this plural society, only if you have database of ethnicity will you be able to determine who is getting what, as well as will you have the kind of information to drive your policy decisions so that all of the constituencies are treated fairly and I dare say equitably. So that we have seen here again that the government has no intention of producing information that is based on data by ethnicity. And what we have, in fact, in a budget is what I may call, and I'm adding another term, a cosmetic budget. Cosmetic. A budget that has a veneer. But if one drills down beyond the face of the budget, one would see what Eric is talking about. Because the budget talks about sectors, the agriculture sector, and the fishing sector, and all of these sectors. And so anybody looking from outside in would say, well, they're doing well, good in agriculture, good in fishing, and all of that. But if one drills down, you would see that these sectors are dominated by a particular ethnic group. And therefore, by virtue of the support given to these sectors, you're literally giving support. And I would say disproportionate support. You're literally giving support to a particular group of people. And that's the reality when one drills down. Beyond this veneer of agriculture, veneer of fishing, that gives it that neutrality. It doesn't tell you what the reality is. You know what's worse? What's worse is that it's not only a budget that seeks to create conditions in those sectors, but monies are actually being doled out to private enterprise in those sectors. How many of us who are African Guyanese know about what's going on in the shrimping industry, the on-land shrimping industry, and how monies are being doled out? People don't have to go and get their own capital. The government is giving them the capital, giving them the facilitation to get involved. Now, that may be good if the government does it in a manner that allows all Guyanese to have access. But these things are being done in sectors that are dominated by a particular ethnic group. Eric made the point about sustainable development. I don't know if you realize that that lingo has been dropped in our budgets. You know, 3 years ago, if you read the budget, we were still talking about sustainable development goals. We no longer talk about sustainable development goals because we have some other development goals other than sustainable development goals, which themselves are crafted in a manner that would ensure, in fact, the sustainable development goals in some regards are built on the pillar of equity. They're built on the pillar of equity. When you talk about zero hunger, eradication of poverty, then you definitely have to go where those things exist and to deal with them.
Mhm.
And you will find that there's need for equitable measures because there are those who are not as affected as others. So we say in Guyana, for example, the Amerindians are the most impoverished. So we're talking about dealing with poverty, then you have to have equitable measures there. Talk
Vincent,
about
let me just make a comment on this thing because we need to start correcting things. The Amerindians own about 19% of Guyana. They're not the poorest people in Guyana. They have an Amerindian Development Fund. 200 of them got 20 million each in carbon credit. The budget builds a lot of things for them. So this idea that the Amerindians are the poorest is untrue. And we keep repeating it. When you look at the asset base, when you look at their access, when you look at the international support they get, they're not the poorest.
I would not contest that, except to say that I'm coming from the perspective of the current quality
Yes,
of life.
yes.
Current quality of life. So I'm not contesting what Erica said, and it's interesting how tonight you're giving different perspectives on the same thing. The quality of life is what I would look at. Of course, there's a lot of disproportionality in terms of the country's patrimony across the ethnic groups. And the Amerindians probably are rivaling the Portuguese in that regard, because those are the groups that benefit the most disproportionately from the
LCDS,
national
yeah.
patrimony. So yes, there is that. The SDGs would take us in the direction where you have equitable policies and look for national development. And so, even whilst we speak about that, one can still look at the budget and see instances of glaring disparity, and that will have greater impact greater impact on the people of African descent. Now, apart from Georgetown, people of African descent are largely dispersed in villages. We have 80 local government areas. You know what's the amount of money given for LDOs, local democratic organs? You know what's the amount? Among those organs, the government has put 1 billion.
1 billion.
Out of
1
11,
billion.
out of
Yes,
1147 billion.
1 billion.
Yeah, 1 billion.
Look, we have it here. 1 billion budgeted to be transferred to LDOs as subvention. 1 billion. It means that they are going to get about 12.5 million each.
But
For
Vincent,
local
let me
development.
build on what you're saying about these RDCs. This budget is built
I'm not
around
in this is
regions.
not the RDCs yet. This is the neighborhood
Yeah,
democratic
the local
councils
government.
and the
This
municipality.
budget, this budget is built around sectors and regions. When indeed, if you want to be fair and inclusive, this budget should be built around villages, village economies that are sustainable, land policies that enable growth, entrepreneurship funds that allow the villages to be diversified into the 25 by 25 Caribbean plan to reduce imports and exports. This would bring equity if you deal it on a village basis. Instead of saying $1 billion in fertilizer is being given to farmers. What does that mean? Who gets that?
Right. So we see where the money is going and where the money is not going. This budget has a comment that's an insult to the people of African descent. They have put another 100 million, and they have specified that this 100 million is for the observance of the decade for the people of African descent. Critical word, observance. It's not for the achievement of the objectives. Of course, the objectives can be achieved with $100 million. It is for the observance. So we, in a sense, they're taking us back to the year of the people of African descent. When the people of African descent put up a development plan, and they knocked it down and gave them money for observance to have cultural activities. And that's what observance means.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means. Probably even to have concerts.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing speaking to the objectives of the decade and the achievement of those objectives.
Mm-hmm.
We
But
have a
even as
huge,
they give us, even as they give the people of African descent 100 million for a year, so-called observance, They give the Amerindians 147 million for a month, Heritage Month. 147 million for Heritage Month, among many other things of larger sums.
Mhm.
I'm just showing you the attitude towards the people of African descent. We signed the decade, the Padaji come and they're causing problems with the pittance, 100 million, take it away from them. We throw crumbs at the African organizations, they get 1.8. And bear in mind, that the 100 million for last year, about at least 2/5 of that remain unspent.
Mhm.
Because not all of the organizations accepted the pittance. So it's
But
not even
David,
100.
David, this comes back to my broader point.
Yes, go ahead, Eric.
Debating the budget in Parliament is a waste of energy. I said last year, the opposition, whoever they are, in a winner take all, is in a master slave environment. Nothing you can do to change the budget. Therefore, you have to influence the budget. And the way you influence the budget is you create your own budget using whatever framework you want, define your priorities, define your risks, define how you're going to get revenues, and then put it together and go to Parliament and debate that. Because regardless of what you say, all you're going to end up in is a course up thing of no value to anyone, including yourself, because you can't change anything. You need to see who your constituencies are. You need to create a budget as if you were running Guyana. And that budget has to be fair, inclusive, sustainable. You have to look at the financial resources, the human resources, and the capital resources. We also have to move away from GDP and look at total capital because GDP falsifies whether there's growth and who's getting the growth, right? GDP is irrelevant in modern economics, but that's what is used to camouflage us that we're growing toward 4% and 50%. Go into any of the villages, tell me if they feel the GDP. Go into the public service, tell me if they feel the GDP. GDP is not what we should be doing if we are looking at sustainable development. It's a fake number because the higher the oil revenues, the higher the GDP. But who's getting the oil revenues? And how is it being spent in the budget? Infrastructure, particular sectors. So we need to change the paradigm. And whoever's in opposition needs to show they can rule the government, run the country by creating a budget that is fair and inclusive and sustainable. How many engineers do we need in the next 10 years? 20,000? What's the plan for that? What's the feeder system in the schools? Therefore, you have to strengthen the schools. That means that you have to make sure that the children in the schools are properly fed, which means a nutrition program. So you go to your farmers and you say, listen, we're going to create a Balsa Familia similar to Brazil, and we will allow you to grow A, B, C, and D. We'll fund you. And we will give coupons to these poor families, and they must buy your crops because they're healthy crops. There are so many linkages that you could create if you think through this in terms of your human resources. What are we doing with the Venezuelans and the Spanish? How do we make sure we have a stable educational environment? What are the things you need to do? You know, and how many black people are going to be engineers? Where the economy is growing? Business people, environmental lawyers, scientists, technicians. If not, for the next 20 years, Guyanese are going to be crowded out. Guyanese of all races are going to be crowded out by foreigners. And once they come in, you'll never be able to get that. So we have a huge unemployment problem, a huge crime problem, a huge health problem. And so you're spending money in areas you should not spend. We should also have a digital economy because that's where the world is going. Every house should be linked up to the digital architecture. And that should be part of the budget in terms of building fundamental infrastructure, not just roads and bridges. What about AI? What about STEM? Where is that in this budget?
Where is that in this budget? And good evening to all of you. And yes, tonight we are really doing it because we are really getting deep into the budget, having looked at the numbers and comparative sectors, comparative numbers for the sectors. We are now going behind the numbers, and we are attempting, doing more than attempt to do an ethnic audit from the standpoint of African Guyanese. Vincent and Eric, I want to take you all to an institution that both of you are connected with. Vincent, you spent a lot of time, a lot of your working years at the University of Guyana. You were a top official of that university. Eric, I think you teach at that university today. And $4 billion for the University of Guyana. Eric, how many $billion is the budget?
1147 billion.
1147 billion, 4 billion for UG. I want you all to situate UG within the larger developmental trajectory that we should be on as an institution that has largely been good to African Guyanese, and the perception that it is an institution that is pro-African Guyanese. Vincent, you go first.
Forgive me, David. I want to say two things before I get to it.
Okay, great.
One is on climate change,
Mm-hmm.
issues of climate change, and the way in which monies are not being dedicated to deal with the repercussions of climate change on the coast. That has an ethnic element in it.
Mm-hmm.
Not only because of who lives on the coast, but because a lot of the investment that is taking place in the private enterprise is not by Guyanese who are resident in Guyana. They are not concerned about the future of Guyana. They're concerned about the future of their profits in the short and probably medium term. You know, it reminds you of how we differentiate between Barbados and Guyana. The Europeans settled in Barbados and therefore in their own interest helped to develop Barbados. And that's why Barbados became more developed than the rest of the islands, because the Europeans are looking after themselves. They didn't settle in Guyana, and so they didn't pay attention to infrastructure and things like that in Guyana. They paid attention to exploiting our resources. And we're having a reputation of that. Even though you may have Guyanese investing, they're already not locally based. They don't care too heck about what happens to Guyana. What they care about is the return on their dollar. So when climate change affects us, they're gone. And they will already reap benefits of their investment. The second point I want to make is that Eric made a point implicit. We don't need to discuss the figures in this budget. They're very once you are able to expose, go beyond the cosmetics and the veneer, then you realize the figures, you don't have to discuss that. The very principles are dysfunctional in terms of developing the people together. The point I want to make in that regard is this. We have a process of urbanization taking place in this country, which is not driven by state public policy. It's not driven by state public policy. And the extent to which we are allowing the private sector to determine how this country develops, and the interest the private sector have from an ethnic and other perspectives. You can see places like Lenora emerging as urban areas, hospital, mall, and everything, without any reference to a national policy of urbanization. And so even our urbanization is being driven by ethnicity outside of national policy. And that is not unrelated to the question of development.
Mhm.
So that you have growth poles, which lend to some development, given how development is determined, but those growth poles are in certain areas to the exclusion of certain ethnic groups. So let me get to the university now. The People's Progressive Party have never been disposed to the development of the University of Guyana beyond the early efforts of Dr. David. And they've never been disposed because they have a disposition that the people who matter in this country, again, the veneer, they call them the working class, and that is where they must expend, because the people who are involved in education, both giving it and receiving it, are some group of people who are parasites. According to Jagan, they're petty, petty bourgeoisie that are not progressive. And therefore, those are not the people you have to focus on in terms of development. But you can't say that. And so I always go back to the situation in 1992. People came into government and complained that the university was dominated by faculty of black people, and that usually was all about black people. Having said that, the same government went to the Faculty of Agriculture that had the most PhDs, and mostly Indo-Guyanese, and extracted them to go into the public service so that Chelly Jagan could achieve his objective of administrative control, something that he articulated, separate and apart from separation of powers. They degutted UG, and at the same time complained, having degutted UG, largely of Indo-Guyanese, in faculty, over 50% of the Faculty of Agriculture, turned around and complained that UG was discriminating and not employing Indians, etc., etc. They have no real interest in the development of the University of Guyana. When Donald Ramatar was the president, an alumnus of the University of Guyana, there was tremendous hope that he would pay attention. He indicated that he was going to contribute, or his government is going to contribute to the development of a new library. And libraries are a hub of the university. Everything is centered around what the library can present, whether it be the traditional library or the electronic library, the library. Look, when Ramatar is in government, we still don't have that library. But yet, Jagdio is criticizing the quality of the graduates. I don't necessarily agree with his criticism, but he's criticizing the quality of the graduates as if they have been resourced to be of a different quality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let
We
me
see
jump
the
in here.
university again
Let me
not
jump
being
in,
resourced.
Vincent, because you've given us the historical context. Here is the development context, the sustainable development context. The last analysis that was done showed that 10% of Guyanese never went to school. 24% primary education, 48% secondary education, 2% tertiary education. We're in an oil economy. We're in a digital future. We need to reverse that. But when you look at the funding of the education system and of UG, it means that we're not going to be running this economy. Others will. Because the infrastructure for schools and universities are not aligned to where the economy is going. So UG needs to be funded in so many different ways, but it needs to be mission driven. Engineers, scientists, lawyers, environmentalists, auditors, this. And then you fund those faculties. oil and gas. So we have a big risk that 10 years from now, Guyanese will not be running this economy because we're not qualified, which means that we have a lot of uneducated people who can't get jobs, who can't make ends meet, and who will create social unrest and crimes. So we're creating a future of destruction for ourselves because the education system is central and fundamental to sustainable development.
Eric, they may well argue that we have gold, and the gold is provided 21,000 scholarships. When gold started and information was available on gold, those scholarships included 5-week courses for motorcycle repairs. So one has to do an analysis of what gold really is doing for Guyana. And to ask the question is whether there is any relationship between the development in trajectory and what gold is providing. Is there that relationship? So that whilst they will argue that, well, don't worry with UG, they're underperforming, but we have gold 21,000 scholarships.
Yeah,
One
you're
has to
right,
do an
Vincent.
analysis.
We have
What,
part-time people getting paid 10,000 without any skills training attached to it. What we need to do is to have a national service geared towards the future, with the University of Guyana and all the technical and vocational institutions as the architecture. And depending on the skill set we get, we subsidize those areas so to get those skills. We need technicians. We have to bring these guys who do, what do you call it? We don't have any certified people who can match, who can fix dents, welders. We need 1,000 welders. Of course, we now have Venezuelans here who are highly skilled. So my question in terms of the budget, what are we doing to make Guyanese competitive? It is not gold. It is a combination of putting an architecture together that deals with the existing high dropout rate, that deals with those who are unemployed, that deals with the types of skills we need. And that means a national service built around educational excellence to sustain the economy. If not, in 10 years, we will have 300,000 foreigners in all these key areas.
Chief
another thing
Eric
we need to
Phillips.
note, David,
Yes,
is
go
that
right ahead. Uh-huh.
when the government talks about make certain statements in the budget, it's unrelated to real cash.
Mhm.
What do I mean by that? They said that they are going to waive the repayment of loans by students who have graduated. That is not going to impact UG, period, because those are people who already graduated. UG has already drawn down their money from the loan agency. And what the government is simply doing is waiving a repayment. There is no new cash in that transaction.
Mhm.
Just waiving a repayment so that the loan agency, which may become redundant if they introduce free education, will not be replenished by the repayment of the loans. So that's the first point I want to make. Second point I want to make is this: that even in terms of monetizing what they're doing, if the first relief is for students who have graduated, we have a majority of those students outside of this economy, about 2/3 outside this economy. So when you monetize it, it's not no big money in the first instance, but it is not impacting people who are serving this economy. What they have not addressed is the immediate real problem of UG. For whatever reasons during the pandemic, UG relaxed its stringencies in terms of payment of fees.
Mhm. Mhm.
And UG just found itself in a position where probably the sum of $300 billion outstanding in fees. And you're waving the flag that you're going to remove fees payment, so nobody's rushing to pay the fees. And so UG is running a deficit
Mm-hmm.
based on projected income because of the number of students who have not paid, some of whom are still current in the system. And so the impact of what you're doing is negative because you're leaving to fester the real problem that UG is faced with, the partial, because they have a real financial problem, but a part of the real problem that they face with. The other point I want to make is that this government has never, and it's related to the point Eric made, has never used public policy to drive the university's growth and development. What do I mean like that? It's never associated the subvention with incentives for student enrollment. In other words, it never said, look, we are going to fund you this way. For every person in natural science you get so much or so much more,
Mm-hmm.
which will then drive people in a particular direction. And you can identify the skill areas
Mm-hmm.
in which you want manpower development and fund it as a fiscal incentive and have the university grow in tandem with the needs of the society. So there's no really tertiary education policy in this country. You know? There's
Mm-hmm.
no tertiary education policy in this country. The last time the government spoke about tertiary education in policy was Bismarck writing 3 lines into the education strategic plan.
2015 to 2020. Yeah.
Yeah. Tonight we have here Vincent Alexander, chairman of IPADA G, Eric Phillips, Chief Eric Phillips, chairman of the Reparations Committee, the Guyana Reparations Committee. And of course, they're involved deeply in the African Guyanese community. They belong to other organizations and themselves part of the intellectual output from the community. We have not gone as far as we wanted to go tonight. So with Vincent's permission and Eric's permission, we'll come back next week, Thursday, to pick up from where we left off. Because as you notice, the gentlemen have come prepared. They have the budget in front of them. They're not, as we say, shit talking. They're really into this thing. And I think it's good for us as a community, it's good for us as a country that we have that other perspective on this thing called budget. Eric, anything that you really wanted to say before we leave tonight and adjourn and come back next week?
I think next week we should focus on, given this budget,
Yeah.
What do African Guyanese do to prosper?
Right.
What are the areas of opportunity and what it is we need to put in place so that we can influence the next budget so that we have sustainable growth in our villages. So that means village diversification. How do we tap into the agricultural budget? What are the key sectors we need to focus on? What should our kids be focused on in terms of school? What should parents be doing? What should the public service be doing in terms of a lot of things? So we need to look at that because it's impacting us negatively.
Vincent?
I just want to wrap up with 2 points.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that national development has to be driven by manpower development. And if one looks at the monies that have been put for manpower development, then certainly we have issues about national development. Suffice to say that there's a policy of importation of labor. Secondly, when one sees what is given to the public service, and the fact that the public service is largely populated by people of African descent. And when one sees what is given there vis-a-vis what is given to other sectors otherwise populated, then in some regards, we're dealing with relative impoverishment of the people of African descent.
Vincent Alexander, chairman of ITPAD-G, Eric Phillips, chairman of the Guyana Reparations Committee, and certainly a delegate and someone who is playing a big role in the regional reparations movement and by extension, the global reparations movement. I want to thank you all, brothers, for really coming here tonight. It's been an extraordinary program in terms of putting on the table new perspective, new ways at looking at our budget. As I promised, next week we'll come back and we'll pick it up, as Eric suggests, that we are going to be looking at what can African Guyanese do. In a sense, our budget, our priorities, our vision for where we want to see Guyana go. I want to thank you all very much, and I'm going to see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, what a program. And it's always, I keep saying to you all as a people, we have to open up ourselves to these perspectives. You know, I played that Calypso, the NC Africa at all, for good reason, because I wanted to go beyond the normal, what we see as African, and to recognize that we live in an ethnicized society. We live in a racialized society. And if we do not pay attention to ethnicity and race, we are allowing ourselves to be crushed, because people are going to say all kinds of other things without really getting to the problem. And for African people, the question of race and ethnicity is important because of our unique experience. It's important for all races, but particularly for Africans because of our unique experience in Guyana. And that's the argument that the United Nations continues to make. And if we do not make our case, nobody else is going to make it for us. Because when you live in an ethnic society, naturally, because of who human beings are, we are competing with each other. And that's okay, so long as that competition is carried out within the context of a nationhood and with against the background of striving for equity. And that is so important. I want us to be revved up on this issue. I want us to be revved up on this issue. I want us to get our children to begin, because we are going to be left behind as a race if we don't pay attention to race. All ethnic groups are supposed to pay attention to race, but particularly African Guyanese because of our unique experiences and what Guyana calls the scars of bondage. We have the scars of bondage fresh. The wounds are fresh because we have never had time to treat those wounds. Came out of slavery, we had to start dealing with colonialism. We came out of colonialism in a world that didn't make allowance for us. We came into a new world order coming out of Bretton Woods at the end of the Second World War. Guyana did not exist. We were a colony. So we entered a world in 1966 that wasn't prepared for us. So we have never had time as a people to treat our wounds. And today, other people are putting salt into those wounds. Some would say put pepper into those wounds. And we have to commit ourselves not to let that happen. We'll be letting down our ancestors and letting down the generations to come. I want to thank you all as always, and to say that love, and I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about a love that comes out of an understanding of our place in this world. A love that comes out of a sense that we have what we call in Black politics a linked faith. A linked faith and a linked faith. That whatever, and Vincent made that point about individualism. Individualism takes you thus far. Thus far. We have a linked faith that we are going to survive in Guyana at different levels. We're going to be surviving as families, as communities, as ethnicities and race. And ultimately, that will determine our survival as a nation. This thing is not easy. And we must not treat it as easy, we must treat it as serious. The fear of being called racist, that's gone. That's gone. And we have to put that fear behind us. I want to thank our brothers tonight for giving us the perspective and leaving us with something to walk with. And next week when we come back, we are going to be talking about how we begin to walk on our own feet, standing erect. I thank you all as always. Tomorrow night, we have our Friday night gang. Dr. Vincent Adams, I think Lincoln Lewis is coming tomorrow, and so forth. I want to thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you all so much.
See black women running from their race. They own black children, they can't face. They don't know their roots as a glorious bloom. Blessed be the fruit of their womb. They just be acting as though they shape of their history. They just be proud of other people's own. They just be glad to disclose their baby's ancestry, putting their child upon a false throne, not their own. For hear them boast to their friends and their neighbor. My baby's nose from his Spanish grandfather. My grandmother married a Chinese named Lau. That is why the eye's so pretty, and he has such thick eyebrows. The dimple come from my husband's side, whose great-grandfather was Irish. And watch how the eye's pretty and wide, cause my mother mixed with British. And watch at me, I'm Caribbean Portuguese, so the shiny and curly. But the baby black down to the eyeball, they see Africa at all, at all, at all, at all. I said the baby black like a voodoo doll, they see Africa at all.